Welcome back, everybody, to the Creation Liberty Podcast. This is show number 43 for July 1st, 2012. My name is Chris Johnson, the founder of Creation Liberty Evangelism, where our purpose is to win the lost to Christ and to teach the truth of God's Word and science. And we believe that God's Word is true and accurate when it deals with history and science. We believe in the literal account of Genesis, that the world was created roughly 6,000 years ago in 6 literal 24-hour days. And we not only believe that evolution is a dumb theory, but also a dangerous and destructive religion. And you can join us in live chat when we do these podcasts. You just go to the link on our website that says podcast, and that'll get you right over to us. And today we have Evolutionist Guest Ricardo from Mexico joining us to discuss evidence of the worldwide flood. Ricardo, welcome to the show.
Hi.
All right. And you just want to go ahead and take 30 seconds and tell everybody a bit about yourself.
Yeah, okay. My name is Ricardo. I'm from Mexico. I'm 25 years old. I'm an industrial engineer, and I accept the scientific consensus on pretty much every branch of science.
Okay, excellent. And so like I said before, I appreciate you coming and spending the time with us today since it was hard to schedule this. But what I was talking about before, we had chatted a little beforehand on Skype before we'd actually gotten on the call, and you had mentioned something about what Christians' positions on aliens were. I didn't know if you were serious about that question or not.
Yeah, I'm serious.
Oh, you wanted me to answer that? Yeah, because we were joking around about... what is Christians' positions on cyborgs and things like that, and so I didn't know if you were serious, but the Christian position would be what the Bible says, that Eve is the mother of all living. That's what the Bible tells us. So the Christian position is people are going to go out there looking for aliens, and they're going to find none. They'll find signs of intelligence, which because God created the universe, but they won't find any alien life will not exist. That's a Christian position.
So not even bacteria or something like that?
Well, Eve is the mother of all living. That's what the Bible says. I don't think you're going to find even bacteria and things like that.
So if that happens, would you leave Christianity or something like that?
Well, if it's classified as alive according to biblical standards, then we have to classify what is alive. And the Bible says that the life of the flesh is in the blood. So according to biblical classification, something that would alive would require blood in it. Whereas, modern scientific classification, they have said, well, anything that has, organic living cells and things like that, then that is considered alive. But that's not the same according to biblical classification.
All right. That's fair.
Okay. So we were just, I didn't know if, I thought you'd want an answer to that real quick. And so anyway, but we were going to talk about... Now, originally when we got started on this, we were talking about evidence for creation, and I said that supernatural events would go outside of what scientific evidence, like what science can analyze.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay. So I talked about that God used more naturalistic means. There was supernatural causes to it, but more naturalistic means with the flood, so there are some things we can analyze to a global flood. So one of the things that I've brought up with a lot of evolutionists, I've never really had too much response to this. For example, would be the polystrata fossils. Are you familiar with those?
I think, well, I don't know if you want to do it like this, but I had an idea, like I ask you questions and we go forward. I don't know if you want to do that.
Well, you were asking if you wanted some evidence of global flood. I didn't know if you wanted
but
to...
I wanted, in a certain order. So I wanted to start, where did the water came from, and what should we expect, in the geological strata, where did the water go?
Okay, we can ask a few questions. If you want to talk about a few things, sure. What's your first one there?
Yeah, where did the water came from? That's the first step we need to have for a global flood, don't you think?
Well, the Bible says that the water came from the fountains of the deep. That means the water was already inside the earth. Okay.
So you don't subscribe to the water canopy theory, right?
Oh, I do. Absolutely. But the thing is, the majority of the water, some people have said, well, a bunch of the water came from the canopy. I don't think there was that much up there. Because the purposes that the canopy would serve, that's according to the creation model, though. That's not something like the canopy itself. That's not provable anymore. That whole thing was destroyed. And by the way, in 2 Peter 3:6, it says that the world before the flood perished, so it's gone. There's nothing that we can prove scientifically before the flood because it's gone. But at the same time, with the canopy and all that, there's some people that say a lot of it came from that. I don't think there was that much. And I more ascribe to if you're looking for causes of the flood, to the ice meteor theory, which other creation ministries disagree with, like Answers in Genesis absolutely is abhorrent to that idea. And I've read their arguments for it. I simply disagree with them because I think it explains a few things that we normally can't. But at the same time, this is, the water, the Bible says the water came from the fountains of the deep. So that's where the majority came from.
Okay, and what's the evidence for that? I mean, do we have any scientific experiments and data to prove that it was? I mean, how could that much water be, inside the earth?
Well, actually, if you take a modern day globe that we have of all the water there, you could actually fill up the entire the ocean levels on a standard globe, with just like a tablespoonful of water. It's actually not that much that's on what we see today out in the oceans, but there are huge underwater pockets, enormous amounts that they found underneath the crust of the earth. That are still, the Bible says that that's where the water came from, and that's where the water went to. Most of it went back in under, not all of it. But there today, when you're saying what evidence do we have of that? Well, we have historical evidence. We have the Bible that tells us how it happened.
Well, then, of course, if you accept the Bible as true, then you can consider evidence for.
Yeah,
that's what we're
exactly.
talking about. That's what we're trying to determine, if it's evidence or not. So I don't think that really counts.
Okay, well, you see how what you added in was your presupposition? You said if you think the Bible is true, that means if you have the presupposition that the Bible is true, then that is considered evidence. And then you said, but you don't believe the Bible is true, so you don't consider that evidence. And so that goes back to my initial question when we were actually on the phone earlier this week. What would you consider as evidence? So if you're saying that nothing in the Bible can be used as evidence, well, then
I'm not saying that.
Okay, so you.
Let's say that's what the Bible says. But if it's backed up, by physical evidence, then yeah, we can consider it as evidence.
Well, there's actually nothing that you can determine in origins scientifically. You can only determine what are we seeing right now. No,
but I think water coming from the earth, I think that can be determined scientifically. Don't you think?
Well, there's a lot of it. There's evidence of things happening with that. If you're talking about like the fault lines, there's huge amounts of water erosion around the fault lines. And I'm not talking about just it sitting around, sitting in water. For the fault lines, in the Atlantic, you talk about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge or things like that. There's huge amounts of water erosion, evidence of water erosion, of water gushing out of these fault lines, where, as from an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't seem to, how would this water erosion get there is really the question.
Well, I have all the information, but okay, let's say that. Let's go back to that. When you talk to the fault lines, we have an explanation for that. It's plate tectonics, and that's
I
we have
agree.
A lot of evidence for plate tectonics. We can measure it. We have a lot of physical evidence for the last, 5 decades or so. So if you want to replace, an existing theory, you need to have another one that explains the evidence better.
Well, hang on a second. First of all, plate tectonics does not explain water erosion. Okay, that's number one. And number two, when you say plate tectonics, I don't disagree with plate tectonics. It's happening. Those plates are moving. But number one, it doesn't mean that the plates have always been moving in the past, and certainly not to the levels that many evolutionists claim they have, because there is no absolute. And this is why we get into, when you ask me, well, I want to hear a creationist talk about the evidence for creation. There's tons of information I can show you out there where there's tons of creationists talking about it, but the problem is that evidence is not accepted by the evolutionists, which is why we end up talking about the evolution theory so much. And that's what I'm saying, is that the evolution theory, or the evolutionists themselves, based on that theory, they presuppose a uniform state of affairs. Basically, it's the uniformitarianism is what they call that. It's a state of mind that's saying what we see right now, or what Charles Lyell proposed, was that the present is the key to the past, and the present cannot be the key to the past. The past has to be the key to the present of what we're seeing now, because that would assume that all things, that nothing catastrophic or nothing has changed within millions of years of evolutionary history.
But that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that nothing can happen. I'm saying that there's no evidence that it can happen. And we're talking about geology, not evolution. I don't see what evolution has to do with, fault lines and water erosion.
Well, we're talking about geology, right? Is there a geological process. I mean, like for example, do you believe that the rock layers are millions of years in age?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, are you familiar with polystrata fossils?
Mm, I think that's like fossils found, in different layers, something like that. Huh?
Yeah, there's polystrata. I mean, the word itself means many layered, but it's a many
Yeah.
layered fossil, and that's where we find trees, fish, sometimes whales. They have been found 80 feet tall, standing on their tail, running through multiple rock layers. And that would be absolute proof evidence that those layers were not formed over millions of years, because those things could, like a tree standing up through multiple layers, could not stand there for millions of years waiting for the layers to form
And how
around it.
mure of those do we see?
A
Are
lot.
they an exception, or
They're
are
all
they
over the
rule?
world. Germany, France, British Isles, Nova Scotia, California. I mean, they're all over the place they find these.
But they're not like. I mean, if we're talking about a global flood, wouldn't we see more? I mean, like.
Yeah, but
they common.
They're found all over the world.
Right. How do you know that it's a single flood and not just local floods? I mean, how do you make that distinction?
Well, do you want to? Are you suggesting that many local floods all over the world laid these down? Is that what you're claiming?
Yeah, I don't see. We see many floods a year. I mean, in different parts of the.
Would you agree then that? Are you saying that water, large amount of water deposits, is an explanation for how these layers would have been laid down? Is that what you're?
I guess unless they're all in the same layer. I mean, wouldn't we expect a single layer of polystrate fossils if there was a flood?
Now, is it possible that it wasn't just a bunch of local floods, that it was a worldwide flood? Is that a possibility?
Sure.
That's a possible. Okay. So what I'm saying
is,
from a Christian,
how you make that distinction.
From a Christian perspective, we have a historical evidence, whereas the evolutionist does not. They're going on pure speculation about this. And when you're saying it could be a lot of water could have laid this down in a short amount of time, well, that kind of disrupts the geologic column. And I'm saying, after seeing a tree standing up through multiple layers of rock, do you still believe those layers are millions of years in age?
No, I'm not saying all the layers are millions of years of age, but there are layers that are millions of years of age.
Okay, how could you tell the difference between...
Let me ask you something. How can a single flood create all the layers? I mean, what's the, how you call it, the process in which the layers are laid down?
Okay, I really want to get back to that point in a moment where you said that, some are and some aren't, because that seems very arbitrary. But you can take a simple example of getting different types of sediments. You can get, sand and soil and gravel and things like that. You can put them into a jar of water, shake it up, set it down on a counter, and let it settle out. It will settle into layers for you. It's kind of similar to how there's...
Have you made that experiment?
Oh yeah, you can do that. That's simple things you do in science class growing
up.
No,
because I've seen it and it doesn't work like that.
It's called hydrologic soaring. Yeah, it does work like that. For example,
hydrologic soaring doesn't give you layers. It gives you the bigger, how you call it, the pellets, or the bigger, grains of material go to the bottom, and the smaller ones go on top. That's hydrologic soaring. It doesn't make layers.
Have you ever seen one of those devices you see in the malls that have the two colors of sand, have black and white sand in it, and you flip it over and it sells out into layers for you? Have you ever seen that?
I have.
That's it. That's what hydrologic sorting does.
No, but I've seen an experiment where they do that, and it doesn't settle into layers. And for example, when we talk, we see chalk layers. Are you familiar with chalk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so we see chalk, then we see coral fossils, then we see coal. How does that happen?
Well, it depends. I mean, from a worldwide flood perspective, there's a lot of reasons why those kind of things could happen in a destructive process like that, where things are being deposited all over the place. But the problem is, from an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't seem to make much sense.
Why not?
Well, because how would all that form? I mean, because you get, you'll have, let's see here, many thousands of layers. Like, for example, when they dig up, what's the word for it? They make kitty litter out of it. Diatoms, diatomaceous earth. They'll have diatomaceous earth quarries, I mean hundreds and hundreds of feet thick, of dead diatoms, all compact and jammed into one area. How would that possibly make sense over what they would call millions of years of accumulation? Why wouldn't we find other things involved in this? Why is it just thousands of feet of dead diatoms?
I don't know, I didn't follow. What are those? What?
Diatoms. They're microscopic. I don't know if you've ever seen... you can look at them under a microscope, the diatoms, and they're really tiny. microscopic organisms. That's what they make like kitty litter out of, is
Okay.
diatomaceous earth. You can spread that stuff around. It's really neat. You can get big boxes of it. You can spread it around your house. It actually kills insects because insects breathe through sphericals in their skin, and diatomaceous earth is so fine, the dust is, that it actually kills the insects because diatomaceous earth gets stuck in the sphericals in their skin. They can't breathe and they die. It's kind of a more organic way of killing them. It's interesting. But anyway, those things are found, blah, 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 who cares? Those things are found hundreds of feet thick, and they have entire quarries where they dig this stuff out. I mean,
Okay.
from a flood perspective, as the waters, the fountains of the deep are all, well, first of all, it's going to kill all sorts of things very quickly.
Yeah.
A flood like this, especially when the water breaks forth.
Okay. So I mean, I don't see what the problem is for geology, for example. Chalk beds, we know they accumulate when the organisms die and they turn into into chalk. But for example, how can they form between different layers from a flood? By the way, I'm looking hydrological soaring and it doesn't do what you say it does.
Well, it does. Hydrologic soaring, there's also called liquefaction, and of course, cavitation is another way that happens. Cavitation being that there are mudslides underwater that move incredibly fast. One of the mudslides cut the transatlantic cable. It was moving, they said, 70 miles an hour underwater. They're huge mudslides that move incredibly fast and deposit layers very quickly. And in a worldwide flood where you have no continents to restrict the tides, you're going to have enormous tidal waves with large amounts of cavitation settling down layers very quickly. And of course, this in turn would be the only way to explain why we'd find polystrata fossils all around the world.
But it isn't. I just gave you a different explanation.
For what?
Unless you can prove it wrong, definitely I don't think you can say that your explanation is the only one.
Well, then we would have to say, okay, well, what you're saying is you're coming from a presupposition that says that this, the worldwide flood explanation cannot be true.
No, I'm not saying it can't be true. You're the one saying that it's the only explanation. I didn't say it's not true. I'm saying that there's another explanation.
For polystrata fossils, there's another explanation for that? Can you give me that?
I just gave you one. Unless you can rule it out.
Perhaps I didn't understand it. Could you give it again in case I missed it there?
Yeah, that you have no way to determine whether it was a local flood or a worldwide flood.
No. You said you had another explanation for the polystrata fossils, and that's
local floods.
Okay, so you're talking about, but this takes enormous amounts of water. You're saying a local flood was able to deposit these trees worldwide?
No. There are different floods of different times.
Now, if you go to places like Yellowstone National Park, you can actually, or the Mary Creek Formation and places like that, you can actually line up the trees. Because, you've got trees that are only so tall, but you can line up the different deposits that they find in the ground. And you can line up the layers, A, B, C, D, and line up the layers, and you can find that the trees connect all these layers at the same time. So it would have to be a worldwide catastrophic event.
No. Yeah, in the same time at that place, but what about comparing it with other places?
Well, at the same time, then... Well,
are they in the same layers in different places?
What are in the same layers in different places?
The trees. Or the fossils, the polystrata fossils.
Well, the fossils, the trees, I mean, even places like the Green River Formation. I mean, they said it took an enormous, even evolutionists are saying, took an enormous amount of water, but they still believe those layers are millions of years in age. You check all the textbooks, you check anywhere that, any encyclopedia, you ask evolutionists, all over the place. I've talked to tons of them. They say the Green River Formation is about 50 million years old, but yet there are polystrata, like fish fossils, for example, running through multiple rock layers. Are you telling me that you believe that Green River Formation is millions of years in age?
That's not what I'm talking about. What I ask you is, for example, in two different places we find polystrata fossils. Are they in the same layers?
In two places? Well, yeah. And there's places you can line those up.
Everywhere in the world.
The Mary Creek Formation is one of those.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, if you haven't seen it, that's another issue.
I'll have to check it out.
But the thing is, I'm asking you, I mean, the Green River Formation is I mean, check it out. I mean, you ask any college professor about the Green River Formation, they state that's 50 million years old. Do you still believe that's millions of years in age, despite the fish that are running up through multiple rock layers?
Yeah, but again, there are other explanations.
You said you do believe
ruling
that.
them out.
You do believe it's millions of years in age?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you see how it doesn't matter what the evidence is? It's your presupposition that's the problem.
No, it's not the evidence, but I told you I'm going to check it out.
Okay, well, you can go check that out. And I actually have pictures of the different fossils they find in all sorts of twisted, contorted positions. I mean, they're not found in any kind of living position.
I wanted to go back to hydrological sorting because you say it's true, and I'm in the position that it is not.
Okay, well, you
so
can say it's true,
I mean,
and you can say I can say that it's not, or you can say it's not.
How do the layers? I mean, are deposited by their weight, by their density, by their size? I mean, what is the mechanism?
Well, it'd have to be through the weight. Just like, for example, when you have, let's see here, like you go onto the beach, and you can stand on the beach, and you'll sink down into the mud, but you can go onto the beach with goggles, and which I've done before. You can go under there, watch underwater with goggles on the ocean line, and you'll see as the waves come past, the high part of the wave puts pressure onto the sand. Then when the low part of the wave comes across, it relieves the pressure, and you can watch sand grains hop up off the ground, and they actually sort based upon their density in the water.
Right, so the heavier elements will be, lower in the geological record, right?
So what would be? I'm sorry?
The heavier materials, or the ones that have more density.
They might be, but not in every case. Because, like I said, cavitation can also mess up a whole lot of the real estate.
Okay, but generally?
Generally, I don't know. Like I said, this is a historical evidence that we're pointing to at this point. Because
that's what I'm asking. What is the mechanism? Because if it's by density or weight or something like that, we should find a certain order in the things, like the denser.
See, but what you're assuming again is what I talked about earlier was uniformitarianism. You're assuming a uniform nature to these things. They said if this is the way it works, as we observe it right here, then that's the way it's always going to work in every instance. And that's not the case with catastrophism like this. Is that catastrophes can mess up a whole lot of things, and it can do certain things that we don't necessarily expect right now because science is only looking at what we see in the world right this second.
Well, I'm not presupposing anything. That was your answer. I asked you, you say, well, yeah, it has to be weight or density. That's why I'm asking you.
It sorts it. I'm saying that when you look at it underwater with goggles, it sorts it based upon its density. Now it does offer, a worldwide flood does offer a possible explanation to these things.
Yeah, but then when I ask you, using your same mechanism, you say, well, we don't know how it was in the past, etc. So, I mean, what real evidence do we have?
Well, that's what I'm explaining to you now.
Yeah, you said density and weight, right?
Well, I'm talking about hydrologic sorting, liquefaction, cavitation, the polystrata fossils. I mean, you still haven't answered my question I asked you earlier. I mean, I asked you, I think this will be the third time.
What question?
Well, I mean, you did, well, maybe you did answer it. I'm not sure. I couldn't quite tell. Like the Green River Formation, take that for example, where everybody says that's 50 million years old, but yet you see these polystrata fossils going through multiple rock layers, but you said you still believe that's millions of years in age.
Yeah, but as I said, I had to check it out.
I know, you have to
check
it out.
The information
and these things can be, I mean, they can be clearly seen on those, but I mean, my prediction is, as long as you hold the atheistic and evolutionary position that you're holding, that the Bible isn't true, it doesn't matter what you see. It doesn't matter what you're going to find when you research this, because you're coming at it from a presupposition that says the Bible cannot be true, and therefore any evidence that would go against what the evolutionary theory says will be rejected.
No, I disagree.
Well, I know you disagree. I'm just saying that is what happens.
Because you believe in the Bible, you're not going to accept anything that disproves the Bible. I mean,
exactly, and that's exactly. I agree with you. That's my presupposition. You were asking about presuppositional worldviews earlier, and that's exactly where we get into that, and that's why we get into so many disagreements about certain things.
Yeah, but again, I want to go back to hydrological sorting because there's a point I want to make. So can we go back?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so again, I ask you, what's the mechanism for the sorting of layers?
Yeah, and I told you that it's based on, when the high part of the wave comes across, it presses on the sand, relieves the pressure. Sand grains are actually sorted by their density in the water.
Okay, density. That's the main mechanism.
Yeah, for hydrologic sorting, yes.
So what do we see? For example, we see, I don't know, a layer of limestone, then we see sandstone, then we see chalk, then again limestone. Why do they repeat?
I
If
said
it's
again, like I
density,
said,
we should find only, one layer of certain type of rock that
again,
shares the
did
same
you
density.
not understand what cavitation is? Have you never heard of that?
Nope.
Okay, that's something I would highly suggest to research because cavitation happens, especially like you take the 2004 tsunami that happened. It was only a 30-foot tall wave, but there was a lot of cavitation that happened just in 2004 with Indonesia. And so cavitation can move a lot of sediment very quickly.
No, yeah, but I'm talking about the layers. How many layers do we
Exactly.
set out?
It lays down a lot of layers like that.
Yeah?
And there's no way to really predict that. I mean, I don't know, in a worldwide flood, how would you possibly predict? I mean, when you could have, there are some people that estimated, like I was listening to Ian Juby earlier this week, and he was talking about the mountains they have. There's certain mountains, like especially in Nova Scotia, they have 700 kilometers worth of mountain range that is completely, it looks like it got a buzz cut. It got sawed off at the top. They're called flat top mountains. And for 700 kilometers, they have a completely level, flat top mountain. It's like its own plane up there. Which, some evolutionists have said, well, maybe it was glaciers, and glaciers, they gouge into mountain ranges, or the water itself goes around mountain ranges. They don't go on top of it and buzz cut it. And the only really explanation to that would be a large amount of water moving incredibly fast in a gigantic tidal wave. Would have had to have been probably 1,500 feet tall, and simply just sliced this thing off of there incredibly fast. And the cavitation levels of speed, or what would have been required there, probably a minimum of at least 50 or 60 miles an hour, at minimum, probably more.
And why don't we see, that all around the world?
Well, it's only going to happen in certain places. It depends on when the mountains are
should
rising or
should we
not.
expect, similar types of erosion all over the world if it was a single flood?
Similar types of erosion, it depends. It depends on the location. In fact, we do find those flat top mountains in many different locations around the world.
Yeah, but we also see mountains that have different types of erosion.
That's true, because there's different types of sediments.
Right. And, but we can correlate, same type of sediments and see, the amount of erosion.
Correlate the same types of sediments and see the amount of erosion, but that is also...
We can see if they correlate. If there's a single flood, wouldn't we be able to correlate them?
No, not necessarily. You see, again, you're thinking on uniformitarian lines. We have to get you off that mentality, because that assumes that everything we see exactly as it is today is the way that it's always happened. And in a catastrophe, there's a lot of things that can take place.
Yeah, well, then I don't see the point of discussing it.
Exactly.
Every point we make, you can say, well, how do you know it was like that, 4,000 years ago? Well,
and
we don't know, but how do you know it wasn't?
Exactly. You are exactly correct, and that's what I was saying. That science is actually limited on what it can determine, and science cannot determine origins of things. It's just not possible.
I disagree. I think some things we can know, but for example, chalk beds. I know you're going to say the same thing, but they take very long to form.
Okay, well, you can... Yeah, well, it depends on what you mean. Chalk beds, like, if chalk is... during a worldwide flood, it's going to form very quickly. Now, you may believe today, based on rates you see today, that it takes a long time to form because of your presupposition that evolution has occurred, and therefore millions of years had to pass, and therefore if there was no worldwide flood, these had to form over millions of years, so it had to take a long time.
But again, what evidence do you have that the formation rate was higher in the past? That's my point.
No, that's not the question. The question is...
things were in the past, but if you're making an affirmative position, you have to bring some evidence.
No, I'm saying that you're taking your presupposition of uniformitarianism and saying, my presupposition is correct, so therefore if you're going to make another presupposition, you have to explain all these things to me.
No.
Okay,
I'm asking a question.
No, listen, Ricardo, listen. I can do the same thing. I can say the flood is part of our geological history, and that's how these were deposited, and if you're going to make another claim, you need to come up with some evidence on how that's done. Now, we can both do that. So basically, we're coming at our own religious presuppositions before we've begun. My argument is that here in the United States, we're all paying for the evolutionary one to be taught. So I want to know how they know that it took millions of years for this to happen. That's why so many websites and YouTube channels and things like that that you're going to see. That's why you will see them discussing evolution so much. Is because here I don't know how it is in Mexico, but here in America we're all I'm being forced right now to pay for that to be taught in the classroom, and I want the evidence for that if I'm going to pay for that, and I think that's only fair.
Okay, but then again, for example, chocolates. Let's forget the time it takes to make. These are made by millions and millions, or maybe trillions, I don't know, of microscopic organisms.
Okay.
How is that physically possible? I mean, they have to be all over the oceans. I mean, all the energy they consume.
Not with cavitation.
I don't see how's that possible.
Not with cavitation. See, what the really strange thing is you have to question is how is it that these tiny amounts of organisms were deposited that tall, okay? And I mean, some of them that you'll find some of them like up to 300 feet thick of chalk quarries they have. My question is, if that were laid down over millions of years, why is it that no other creature or nothing died in this area? Why is there no erosion marks in these layers where it maybe would have rained once or twice in a few million years? Why don't we find any of that?
What do you mean rain? Those are formed in the ocean.
Okay, well if they form in the ocean, like you're talking about, I mean, then the question is, why is nothing else? Why are there no other fossils involved in there?
Why are there no other fossils?
Yeah, why is it just a thick layer of chalk?
Yeah, but again, in creationism, how can they form so fast and not have any animals in there?
For the same reason, like take for example, you're saying how they form so fast. Take for example, I mean, you've got like for example, when we talk about the chalk layers, and you're saying that this took millions of years. Okay, you're saying that no other creature possibly would have died and been fossilized in this area for millions. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years.
Well, I don't know if they haven't fossilized. I haven't seen, I haven't checked for that.
Okay, and neither have I. You see, neither of us have. But at the same time, I mean, we find that, when you're saying, well, how would it, I'm not sure whether your question was how would, creatures fossilized so quickly? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, cavitation, again, I highly suggest you go look up cavitation because that causes an awful lot of property damage.
I actually looked for it, but in Wikipedia it just, has some engineering, applications, not anything about
going and searching Wikipedia is, I mean, that's not really doing research. You need to go in and actually find some books and some things about this issue.
Sources.
But the thing is, and check out the sources, find the actual documentation and read about it more and study this out. But again, it's cavitation, like I said, it's not talked about much outside of earthquakes and tsunamis and global catastrophic problems. With evolutionists, they generally don't talk about it much at all, and that's where a lot of times you almost have to go to creationist material in order to find some things on cavitation. But at the same time, I mean, there are a lot of things that we find within these layers. Like for example, when you find the fossilized clams on top of Mount Everest. I mean, the top 3,000 feet of Mount Everest is loaded with clams in the closed position. And clams don't die normally in the closed position. Usually when you walk along the beach, you'll find you hardly ever find a matched pair, and you don't find them closed if they're dead, because the muscle inside relaxes and it just opens up. It's a natural response. But we find stacks, I mean huge, tons, hundreds of feet stacks of petrified clams in the closed position. The only way to get a clam to die in the closed position is to bury it rapidly, which would be easily explained with cavitation, since you have gigantic mudslides moving incredibly fast. They've recorded them up, anywhere from 50 to 100 miles an hour, cavitation mudslides that would just bury beds of clams, and when they wake up dead, they can't open, which is a much more logical explanation than to say they evolved into other creatures millions of years ago.
No, I mean, that can be explained by plate tectonics, clamshells on mountaintops.
By plate tectonics, but you're saying that this took, millions of years and the mountain slowly arose.
Yeah.
I'm saying no, that doesn't happen. We don't see that. Where have we ever seen a mountain arise?
We can measure that they're constantly rising.
No, what you're saying is you'll see a place where the ground has lifted up, or an area where there has been some pressure and some rising. But then what you do is take what I talked about, the uniformitarian assumption that this is the way it's always been happening throughout history, and you simply say, well, if we had millions of years, then that's how this mountain got there. But nobody has any evidence of that. That's purely an assumption.
Yeah, we can see by the geological layers that the ground has been lifting up.
And I'm telling you, those geological layers are not millions of years in age, but you are still stating that they are. You still believe that they are.
Okay, well, you say that based on what dating methods support 6,000
Polystratofossils, I mean, we're going
year.
around in circles. Polystratofossils by themselves prove that those layers are not millions of years in age.
I'm asking you, what dating
Now,
methods prove that
I am
the
giving
world
it
is
to you,
6,000
but
years old?
I've got photographs of these from places all over the world. Now, if you want to believe they're millions of years in age, Ricardo, you are welcome to believe that, man. I really don't care what you want to believe.
That wasn't my question. I asked for dating methods that said or give the date to approximately 6,000 years old.
Now, dating methods is something that that wasn't part of our discussion yet today. Do you want to switch to that?
No, I'm just asking a question.
Because that's but the subject matter of what you're asking is getting off topic of where we're going, because you're asking now about dating methods for these things. And in order to discuss dating methods, because dating methods themselves are a huge tower of assumptions that are stacked on top of each other before they even begin to make calculations. And that itself has huge presuppositional arguments behind it, and that becomes the problem. They presuppose evolution to have occurred before they can make any dates.
Yeah, but I'm not asking whether you believe or not that they are correct about the 6 million years. I mean the 6 billion, or I don't know how many it is. I'm asking you whether are there any dating methods that support creationism?
Any dating methods that support creation? I don't think there's any dating methods that support anything. That's my point.
So you reject dating methods? I mean,
the dating methods are wild. I mean, just you get all sorts of wild numbers when doing this, and you assume all sorts of things. I don't think it has any evidence for evolution either. There's no evidence for creation or evolution in the dating methods because there's just so many things that can't be verified. For example, take potassium argon dating. For example, you take they're dating the rate of decay from potassium to argon, but when they have these potassium deposits, they say, well, it takes so many millions of years for this to decay, for the half-life on it. They're assuming that this potassium has not been contaminated by any means for millions of years. That is a really far stretch of assumption to make, and that's one of many assumptions that it takes to make those dating methods.
But then why do they correlate with other dating methods? I mean, if they were,
would you like to know why?
Reliable, we would expect all kinds of dates, but we can correlate with ice-core dating, with three-ring dating. There's a correlation there.
If I could get a moment, I will pull up with you and I'll explain to you exactly why they get the same dating methods. I'd have to have just a moment here because I got to go into one of my other articles here. You know what? I don't think I can get it right now.
It's okay. I mean, it's okay.
But
we don't
basically,
have to,
I can give you. I can give you
this is a whole
quotations.
nother topic. We could spend another hour.
Yeah, I can give you quotations from evolutionists on this issue because when they're saying that they actually only select certain dates they find. What they'll do is they'll date a sample and they'll date it a number of times. They'll get a wide range all over the scale. What they do is they cherry pick the dates that they want that match the geologic column. That's how they do this. That's why they're getting dates that line up with this. They say, oh, well, if we don't get a date that matches the geologic column, it must be incorrect, so they automatically throw it out. Then they throw it out only on the basis that it does not match the evolutionary geologic column. So basically, it's the way they think it happened. It's actually not done by any scientific process whatsoever. It's done by cherry picking how old they think it already is.
So they're being dishonest. That's what you're saying?
I'm saying that some of them are. There are some people that are dishonest. I think many of them think that this is actually how it's done because what they do, they think this is legitimate because they believe the geologic timescale, this geologic column, is so verified through many different fields of science. They will be in their field of science, and when they are questioned on this, they'll say, well, you'll have to ask some of these geologists, or you'll have to ask the biologists about this one because I don't know all the details of it. They basically push it off into some other branch of science. And they themselves probably don't know what they're doing is completely illogical. I don't think they really see it. I think that's for most of them.
Okay. Well, I disagree. I think they know what they're doing. And the fact that we can correlate, different scientific branches, I think that's enough evidence. And not just that, I mean, data methods are not just, something someone invented to disprove creationism. They have actual applications.
Well,
I mean, I work in the oil industry. We use dating methods, and it works. I mean,
well,
unless you believe that oil companies, are spending money on something that doesn't work. But okay, I mean,
well, the dating methods that they're using are still based on how old they already think it is. I mean, you take just on like take the carbon dating method for example. I got a couple quotes here I can give to you of some scientists who are saying how it basically happened, or how it actually happens. This one is from Soderbergh and Olson. I can provide that on annotations on the video later if people want to look it up. He says, quote, if a C14 date supports our theories, that i.e. that means his evolutionary theory, he says, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict them, we put it in a footnote, and if it's completely out of date, we just drop it. End quote. Now, my question to this guy is, how do you know the dates you dropped were wrong, and how do you know the dates that you included in the main text were right?
Because we can compare it to other readings. I mean, that happens
Compared to what?
Every time. I'm an engineer. Sometimes when you're working on something, you get weird readings, and I mean, you don't take it.
Yeah, but here's my question, Ricardo.
You have to compare it with what you know and what you already.
Yes, exactly, and that's my point. You said you have to compare it with what you know. So what are you comparing it to?
To other measurements and to other types of dating methods.
Yes, and what are those dating methods comparing it to?
To their own readings.
They're comparing it to the geologic column.
No, I'm talking about
that's exactly how it's done.
Dating. I mean, there are.
I'll tell you what, Ricardo.
Dating methods in different branches.
Maybe your mind is closed to this issue because of where you work. That's a possibility. But there's a video I put out on potassium argon dating. I think you should see. It's only 10 minutes long, and I would highly encourage you to take a look at this because if you're still open-minded, I don't know if you are or not. But I would definitely encourage taking a second look at this one because I can show you demonstrating how when many scientists from many different fields all across the world have verified certain areas were a certain age based on potassium argon dating, just to take an example, okay? And how when they were digging inside of it, they found fossils that did not match the geologic column in what they dated that to be. So instead of just repositioning, re-evaluating the geologic column based on their findings, they went back and redated it a bunch of times until they got a number they wanted.
Well, I'll have to check it out.
Go back, I have all the scientific references on that video, and I will send it to you if you watch it.
Yeah, okay.
But actually, right now, I don't want to interrupt and have us go to another place, but we've exhausted our hour. And I have
40 minutes.
Yeah, well, it's getting towards the end of the hour, and I'm going to have to go tonight anyway. It's starting to get late over here. But what I wanted to do was give you, first of all, thank you for coming on, and I do really enjoy talking with you, even though we disagree on some issues.
We can have a follow-up later.
Yeah, sure. I'd be more than willing to have you back if you'd like to come back.
I'll check you can send me the videos or the articles you want me to read, and I'll check it, and we can have a follow-up.
Sure, yeah, we can talk about some more on this, or some more on some other topics we had discussed talking about as well, if that sounds good to you.
Yeah.
And last thing, real quick, I want to give people a chance to do that. Did you have a website or a YouTube channel or anything that you would like to say over here real quick for anybody that wants to check you out?
No, not really.
Nothing like that? Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to give you an opportunity in case you did. But Ricardo, I really appreciate you coming on, and you have a nice evening, okay?
All right, bye.
All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. All right, folks, that's it, and that was a really good show. I appreciate him coming on and talking about these issues with me. Again, I do this show a lot for other people that they would be able to analyze these issues on their own, and so you guys can go back and check that out and see what you think of all that. So let me check the chat room real quick. I don't know if we had. I don't think we had too many comments tonight, and I think part of it might have been my fault because I've had some internet issues. I'm going to have to call my internet service provider and see if I can get some of this fixed before we do another show. Anyway, I appreciate you guys joining us. Join us next time. We're going to see if we can get Tony from Australia back on here to see if he wanted to come on and discuss some on the presuppositional apologetic argument, and I'm hoping to have him on as soon as we can get him back. So join us next time for that discussion. It'll be very interesting, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks a lot.